All right, everybody, we'll get started. So this webinar is telling your library's story through grant writing. It is kind of an encore session because Katie hosted a session at our in-person workshop on grant writing in September of last year. Katie Kehoe is the grants librarian at North Carolina A&T University, where she manages major grants for the Bluford Library, as well as communications for the library. So I will hand it over to her.
Thank you, Devin. I'm so glad to be here today to talk to you about grant writing and telling your library's story through grants. So we're actually going to talk about one of my favorite parts of writing a grant application, which is the statement of need. And so instead of focusing on everything about grant writing, we're actually going to hone in on one aspect of the application. And I know that many of you wrote in your pre-survey that what you're looking for is you're a beginning grant writer and you want an overview of the whole process. I think that beginning with a statement of need actually will do this for you, particularly if you're just starting out. So a statement of need can travel with you through multiple applications, and it can serve as a guiding light of what your library's goals are, what your story is, what your community needs. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see with beginning grant writers is that they focus on the stuff. What is the project? What do you want to buy? As opposed to why do you want this? What does your community need? So our goal today is to focus in on your mission as a library, to focus in on the needs that your community has, that your library serves. And this is going to help you find funders who are interested in serving the same needs that you are interested in. So I'm going, and by the way, for those of you who are interested in understanding like the full process, both Devin and I have pulled resources for you so that we can move forward. So here's what the next hour is going to look like. I'm going to go over just all the elements of a grant application and kind of talk about where this part of the grant application fits. We're going to define what a statement of need is, and we're going to look at examples from winning grants. These were written by my colleagues and myself, and they were gracious enough to allow me to use these examples in the workshop today, and they come from multiple library settings. All of them did win, but you don't have to like them. Sometimes we learn the most from things that we don't like. And then if I'm doing my job, we're actually going to begin generating ideas and working on writing a grant here in this workshop together. And hopefully there'll be time at the end for questions for us to go a little bit more into specifics that you want to know more about. So when we're looking at a grant application, everyone is different. Every funder is different. Their needs are going to be different. They might have different pieces that aren't listed here. So just know that you should get to know what your funder is looking for. And one of the very basic things is just to really read what they want. But most applications have like an abstract or a summary. This is a summary of the whole grant application. I think a lot of people summarize what their project is going to be. Um, the funders are generally interested in reading this very short 100-word statement of exactly what you're going to do and why you're going to do it and why your community needs this. And then the statement of need often opens up the narrative. We're going to talk about that more. A project description, separate from the statement of need. This is one of the biggest mistakes that beginning grant writers make, is that they confuse what the project is going to be with what the need is. All right, so a lot of times people are focused on like, all right, I want to have a podcasting room. All right, why? What is the need? Why does your community need a podcasting room? Maybe the need is that your community has a need for telling stories, or there needs to be, then that need can be fit through multiple different kinds of projects, right? It could be a podcasting room, it could be an open mic, right? So a need fits multiple projects. That's how you know that you found a need as opposed to a project. A timeline that gives a realistic view of what you're going to accomplish and when, and then a budget and a budget narrative. The difference being is the budget just gives a summary of like what the spending is going to be, and a budget narrative offers a justification for that spending. Sometimes what is needed is to demonstrate the qualifications of the project team. Why this team? Why are you the one that we need to select to carry out this work? What is your knowledge of the need? Again, a lot of this comes back to that statement of need. And then if you're working with partners, a letter of support from these partners is critical. But we're going to focus in on this part of the grant application, and we're going to talk about how it impacts all of the others. So, a statement of need for a grant describes the specific public or community needs an organization or project will address. Again, not a project. An effective statement of need conveys urgency. It demonstrates how critical needs are currently unmet or underserved and reveals the real-world impact of unmet needs. It can also point to how these needs can be met with a realistic, targeted investment. So, for example, a need might be that 10,000 children in your community don't have access to a laptop to be able to do their homework at home, right? Not a project. The need is that they don't have the digital resources to access homework at home. All right, how you might fulfill that need with a project might look very different depending on who your community is, where you live, what you're doing, what your resources are, what the grant might fund. So we're really focused on that need. So further, what does this look like? When you're writing this, I want you to think about what is the need or the problem? Who has the need or the problem? What is the community? And this is not just simply knowing the identifiers of a community, but actually talking with them, making relationships with them, seeing kind of what is the whole community and what they're hoping for. So why is this a need or a problem? Sometimes funders don't understand why something is a need or a problem. So really defining why, if this need is unmet, it's going to have a large impact. What will happen if the need or problem is not addressed? So for example, in the one I was just talking about, well, the students don't have access to digital resources. They might not have access to learning at home. How do you know this information? This is going to be really important, that data of where did you learn this? How did you learn it? And why are you the person or organization to address it? Why should this project take place in a library? Why not somewhere else? So a strong statement of need is based in data. It tells you, who these people are that have this need. It gives a sense of how broad the need is. It tells you where it's happening. So if you do not have enough data to write a statement of need, then I would reevaluate the problem, the research, and your understanding. So generally, when people are struggling with this, it means that they haven't gotten enough data to really justify what the need is in their community. They might be like, oh, I really want a podcast room. And then you might not have the data demonstrate that your community will use it. It's just something that your library thinks might be something that they would like to have. But if you're saying, we've surveyed our community, we found that this would be a good resource for these reasons, right? That's what people are looking for. So it's not so much of what you're looking to buy, but why? Why should this funder give you this money? And why are you going to solve a need or a problem? So ways to collect this data. Here are some ideas, but you're not limited to this. Mapping the network. So knowing who in your community is currently working on this need or with the population that has this need, and make a list of this. Call them on the phone, go and make meetings with them, meet them in person, really know what is going on in your community at a local level. All right. Survey the population, not just who is in your library, but who is not in your library. So that might involve, again, leaving the library to really understand what the needs are, because maybe the reason these users aren't coming to your library is because your library isn't meeting their needs. So being able to survey both internally and externally. interviewing, this can be really simple. This can just be talking to people at the circulation desk. One of the things that I love to do is put out like one of those easels where you have paper, and I'll ask a question like, if we have someone who is working on a grant for nap pods. And so just asking like, would you want to use a nap pod? Why or why not? Like, just very simple, gathering data and then reviewing the literature. So sometimes you know about the project locally or the need locally, but looking at like, what does the literature say about this need in your state? What does the literature say about this need in the country? What have other people done to solve this need? And how does this need impact uh, not just your library, but other libraries, and having that strong sense of the literature and understanding where your local community fits into this larger story, and how if you're solving this need for your community, it can become a model for other communities that need to solve this need. That takes your grant application to the next level, because you're not just sitting there thinking about how do I solve this need for my library, you're thinking about how do I solve this need for my state. And when funders are looking at a stack of applications, sometimes there's only 5% that they're going to fund. So really thinking about how does your project be something that they would want to fund and then replicate. Obviously, every community has their own needs, but this is kind of what funders are thinking about often when they're reviewing applications is, have you thought about your local community? Have you thought about your state community? So we're going to review some examples, and I'm going to drop these questions into the chat so you have them. We're going to start just by reviewing an example together, and then I'm going to send you into breakout rooms so that you can review examples within your field. So I've pulled examples from the public library, from the archives, and from academic libraries. So hopefully there's something here that speaks to you and might represent what you're doing. So here are the questions that we're going to answer. And we're going to answer that you can unmute yourself and answer these questions. I haven't looked at the example yet, but I want you to be thinking about these questions when you look at the example. We're going to be looking at the example, and I want you to think, what is the need or problem that you can see here? Why is this a need or problem? What will happen if this need or problem is not met? And what data or evidence do the authors provide to support their claims? So let's take a look at this example together, and then we'll send you to breakout rooms to look at more. And these will be the questions that you look at when you're in your breakout rooms. So this first one is a public library setting, and this was funded by the North Carolina State Library. It was an LSTA grant. It was one of the easy grants that they have, if you're familiar with that, for those of you in North Carolina. So this was the beginning of their statement of need. You only see one part of this application. There's a whole part of the application. Again, it doesn't go into the project. So we're not talking about projects yet, we're talking about needs. So in Durham County, an estimated 10,000 households do not have access to a device at home, and nearly 13,000 do not have access to the internet. Many of these households without devices or internet access utilize the digital resources at the Durham County Library. Librarians answered questions about computer usage and taught basic digital literacy skills in group classes. Patrons also came to the library with their personal devices to use the free internet within the buildings. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, these services are currently unavailable. In particular, the Stanford L. Warren branch serves a community that needs digital inclusion support. Situated in U.S. Census Block 1301, the census block has one of the lowest rates of internet connectivity in the county at 24%, and one of the highest rates of people without devices at 34.3%. We believe that a Digital Navigator program would address the long-term need for individualized support, assisting these users in gaining access to digital resources, internet devices, and the skills they need to fully participate in the community. Now, you don't have to like this example. You can find problems with it. That's great if you see some. But I just want to start, and you can unmute or you can write in the chat. But what is the need or the problem? lack of devices and internet, communities' lack of internet connectivity, internet access, and devices to use it. Right. Why is this a need or a problem? Right. The problem is a significant portion of the community is cut off from the benefits of the internet. Internet access, thus information access, economic status of the community. Many services are online only. Right. More and more resources and aspects of our life are moving online to the point where sometimes online is the only option, and anyone who isn't able to access the internet is severely hampered in life. Um, so I think these are all wonderful answers. And I actually think this is a part of the statement of need that really needs to be developed, right? Is really spelling out why this is a problem. How is this impacting people in every aspect of their life, right? From education to job access to telehealth to even just like I think we underestimate the value of entertainment online, right? And what you're cut off there. Um, so to me, as when I'm reading this, that's one of the things that I would give this writer feedback on is really spelling out why is this a need or a problem? What will happen if this need or problem is not met? All right, cannot fully participate in the community. It's good. Members of the community will be at a disadvantage. The population will lack being able to access information they need. People will be prevented from applying to jobs, doing taxes, students not be able to access learning. I think these are all great. So what evidence or data do the authors provide to support their claims? Right. Rates of internet connectivity, the census, right? And there's a lot more that you could bring in here. Remember, we only have an hour, so I can only bring you about paragraph length segments. So, there's more that you might dive into here. One of the aspects with digital inclusion work is that it's very hard to survey people who don't have access to the internet. So as you're thinking about this, think about the ways in which the need of your community might impede you getting the information that you would like to understand fully the need that your community has, right? So just thinking about what do you know and what do you don't know, and how is that going to impact writing your statement of need, and how is that going to impact your project? All right. So I really want to make sure that you'll have time to write. I know I missed some answers in the chat. All of them were excellent. So what I'm going to do is we're going to shift into breakout rooms. I believe Devin has this organized. And we're going to give y'all about 10-15 minutes to talk in smaller spaces to review kind of the examples that we gave. And then we're going to come back out and I'm actually going to take you through a guided writing exercise about writing a statement of need for your library. And this is the beginning and the foundation of not just one grant application, but could be the beginning of multiple grant applications. All right, I'll throw it to you, Devin.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is
Drafting it. If you've kind of looked at the questions, I would take a moment to write for the next few minutes to begin honing your statement of need, to really be thinking about it. For those of you that are still in process, I'm going to guide you through a few more of the questions that you might not have seen yet. We are in a little bit different places with the breakout rooms, but I think this is okay. So take a moment and reflect, if you were in the group that got a little further, on where you are. For those of you who are still kind of thinking through the questions, I'm going to go over just a few more. And for those of you who have written on this is a chance to write a little bit. So I would think about, for those of you who are thinking this, why does the community need this, what you're thinking of, and what will happen if this need is not met? And why is your library the space where this need could be met? So I'll give people a few more minutes to write on this. And I'm going to make sure that we end at 2:50 so you have a chance to ask me questions.
Katie, which case study did y'all go with?
So we looked at the archives case study. What did y'all look at?
We looked at the third one, the academic library project with redlining in Greensboro.
What did your team think?
There was a lot of great discussion. One thing that we talked about in the beginning was like what potential communities does the library serve? And so given this particular project, we looked at how the library serves community patrons, students, faculty, researchers, alumni even who would be interested in this sort of a project, a digitization project. Looking at also how city leaders and city planners could benefit from learning about the history of redlining in Greensboro, and civil rights groups and cultural heritage institutions, kind of thinking through the International Civil Rights Museum in Greensboro. One thing that came up as a group was there's a lot of different definitions of what redlining is. There's some that are this catch-all of describing discriminatory practices in which financial services are withheld from neighborhoods that have significant number of racial and ethnic minorities, but also the like historic practice in the 20th century of the redlining maps that were drawn to assess financial risk. And so one thing that makes it tricky in a grant project is when you have this concept or term that has a variety of different definitions, like making it as clear and consistent as possible. Because otherwise with a reviewer, they might feel like you haven't really defined like what the concept is and how that relates to the need that you're addressing. But one thing that came up that I thought was really great was there were group members that mentioned how, like, what will happen if this need is not met. There are some really good points that were raised. Does anybody in the group kind of want to share that what we talked about with that question? I feel like Adebola raised a good point um, that I'll kind of summarize quickly, but how the practice of redlining impacts socioeconomic has socioeconomic impacts on a community for generations, and it affects the overall community of Greensboro, not just those who are acutely affected by redlining. And I think that is such a good thing to bring up in a statement of need, is how like it's important for an entire community to understand a discriminatory practice because it is affecting the overall economic health of the community. Um, and a good way for kind of what you said earlier, where like it ties into broader systemic issues, um, and not only something that's affecting Greensboro, but other cities in North Carolina, in the South, in the United States. So um, that was something that we kind of included in drafting that statement of need.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful conversation. Um, and I think really thinking about that impact, right, of the need and who it's going to serve to fulfill that need, right? That one really gets that impact. And one of the things for that application was really thinking about the national conversation and how does the story in this community reflect a story that's larger than that community.
And that speaks to being able to, with the project, once, you can then, carry it on. If it worked here, then you can use that example going forward for other communities.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what a lot of funders are looking for. Um, Devin, you gave such a wonderful summary of your conversation. I'll try and summarize the conversation that my team had. And I invite anyone who is in the breakout room with me to please jump in and add additions. So we looked at the archives grant, which was looking at funding the preservation of films from FD Blueford Library at AMT, which is the largest HBCU in the nation. And specifically, these films were going to be lost to time because Vinegar syndrome, or due to the fact that we no longer have the technology to play these films. Like we had the technology, but the technology is so out of date, and that these films are not available to the public at this time without being digitized. And so people did I think, a good job of pulling out the need and talking about how this is information at an HBCU that might otherwise be lost. So where it's coming from, and what kind of history we're trying to preserve. And one question that I thought was really good was, well, is this enough? Like, are these enough films to be digitized? Does the project need to be larger for the funder? And I thought there was a great conversation about that. Like, it depends, right? Is this grant a $5,000 grant? Is it $1 million grant? What is enough for the funder, and what are the needs that that funder is looking to fulfill? And what do you need? So one of the things about starting with a statement of need, as opposed to starting with searching for grants, is you're really thinking about what do you need right now, right? So if you start with looking at grants, you'll look and see, what does the world need right now? Or what are people interested in right now? Because grants go through a lot of trends. There are things that people want to fund. But what will stay constant is your knowledge of your community and what your community might want and need at that time. Does anyone in my breakout room want to add anything to this? Yeah, go ahead. I think you're on mute. I saw someone raise
There
their
we
hand.
go. Sorry, I clicked it again. Was the information, the data being collected to send in the grant, was that enough? And it was viewed by the archiver, but then you came and you said that they actually needed a spreadsheet of all the different information, and that speaks to the specificity that the funder may need for a particular project.
Yeah. And that's something to think about with these. These are just one small snapshot of grant applications. Many funders actually provide full grant applications if you ask of grants that have won in the past. And one of the things that I do is I'll reach out if something is a submission where previous winners cannot resubmit, which happens in grants, then you can reach out to people who have won before or colleagues that you know who have won grants and ask for the winning grant application that they have and read the whole thing and really study it. A lot of this is a matter of, once you know what you want to fund and what your need is, then it's a matter of just getting to know the genre. Because like anything, this is a genre of writing and it's very predictable. So I hope that those of you who are in my breakout room got a chance to write your statement of need. Because that's ultimately what we are doing is that writing that you generated there is writing that could move you forward. So my hope for the next steps is that you begin to collect data, and really thinking about the statement of need, that you seek out funders or people. They don't have to be funders. Find people who want to solve the same problems as you, because that's going to lead to grant applications that you actually want to work on. So many times, like I've seen people who they finally get there and they write their grant and they win. And then they're like, I don't know how I'm going to carry this out, or I haven't partnered with the people that I need to partner with. Seeking out the people who want to solve the same problems as you is going to set that foundation. And so we only have 4 minutes left. I'm actually gonna pause on this and just pull out and ask you, what do you want to ask me? What questions do you have in these last 4 minutes?
Oh, why does grant writing have such an onus? Everybody's like, "Oh, I don't want to do grant writing," or it's like, "Oh yeah, I've done that before." Would anybody like to, there's just a kind of feeling about grant writing. I don't understand. It seems fascinating to me.
How do y'all feel about grants? I'm gonna throw that question out to the team. What scares you about them? What do you like?
I agree with Bradley. I've done a lot of things in libraries, but I've never written a grant. It just terrifies me. I don't know why. I'm with you. It sounds great, but I just can't do it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like there's all these little details and like things you're supposed to know to put in them that you don't know unless you do it regularly or read through them regularly. And I think that's the fear. It's a lot of work to put in for something that if you're not doing it correctly, then you're just going to get shut down.
Yeah. So what I'll tell you is that most grants have a grant officer, and they're really nice people. And they will read drafts ahead of time, and they will provide feedback. So actually for LSTA in North Carolina, one of our big funders, they put a deadline where they're like, if you submit by February 9th, we will read it and we will give you helpful feedback, and they're very kind to you. All right.
Oh, that's really great to know.
Yeah, so one of the things that I know is they're people, and they're really interested in giving away this money to other people who are really interested in solving the same problems as them. And I also would encourage you to think about funding beyond grants. So my job is to help people get grants and talk about grants and do all this. And sometimes I'm like, are you sure you want to do this as a grant? Because you're going to have to get all of this reporting and do all of this work. And so I think what makes me get nervous about grants is like, what does the other side of this look like? What does it look like if we win this money, and what does the project have to carry out? Writing, it's easy because writing is the dream. That's where you get.
We will also send out a handout with a list of different resources, including top giving foundations in the state of North Carolina that you could potentially like develop a relationship with, and look at the potential to have a foundation funded project instead of a grant funded project. I'll also include the contact info for Catherine Prince, who's manages grants for the State Library of North Carolina. And then IMLS has like several different people, but depending on what sort of project or proposal you have in mind, you can meet with those folks at any point kind of for IMLS. I think September is the deadline. So any point in like May, June, July, as you're drafting something, it's like part of their job is to be able to talk to people who are interested and kind of provide feedback on their proposals.
Awesome.
One question that came up in the registration that I wanted to share with you, Katie, is, especially from your perspective as the grants librarian at your institution, could AI facilitate the creation of a template or parts of the grant application? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it could. I mean, it has a long way to go. So I will tell you that I use AI in my writing just to like practice using it. But I have not yet found it to be as useful as me in my writing. So what I find is that when I work with generative AI is that it often repeats itself a lot in ways that are not useful, and it likes to add a lot of words that are not necessary. So when you're writing a grant, you're often working on a word count, and the AI currently loves adjectives. The AI currently loves to add jargon in. It does not look at consistent terms. And so the fact that for a grant, you have to be very consistent throughout. And right now, I feel like AI for writing is at the point where it can know how to fold a sock, but it doesn't know how to change the dial on the laundry to know that you need to do heavy load and that you need to use like this specific laundry detergent or whatever for the job, right? It can only like hit the button on the one thing. And so I can actually point out very quickly without anything like whether or not my colleague used AI at this point, just as someone who writes a lot. And I've right now I have a track, I have a running record. I'm like, you used AI to write this, and I am certainly like 10 for 10. So until I start seeing it being able to handle the nuance that's required and handle the compression that's required, I'm not sold yet. But I do think it's a wonderful tool. And one of the things that I do use it for is I'll say, can you cut 200 words from this statement? So I'll write something because a lot of times you have a line limit. Or I think it only is as good a writer as you are. So I'll be like, it looks like I've used a lot of like introductory phrases in this paragraph. Can you give me some different kinds of sentence structures to be able to use this so that it's more readable, right? I might frame that prompt a little differently. But the funder has already given you a template. You don't need the AI to create one. I don't know if that's helpful or not. I'm so interested in this, what's going to happen with AI next. I'm not a Luddite. I'm totally down for it working well and saving us lots of time.
We have one question that came up from a couple of folks in registration about like finding small grants for specific needs, like purchasing a Cricut or like a 3D printer or something like that.
I would go to your state library or to your friends groups.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, if it's just small, go to your friends group. And if you don't have a friends of the library, try and start one. Which I know is like a big thing. Just start a friends of the library. Like, I'm just dropping that in, like with all the free time you have as like like under-resourced, overworked librarians, just like, create a whole nonprofit as part of your job. But seriously, that is sometimes less like as someone who has like executed grants. To me, it seems like less work to start a Friends of the Library, or then they give you money for what you specifically want. Because sometimes like you're writing, you're like, I just need this Cricut. And then they're like, well, can you tell me the global reason as to why you need this and how this will have a state impact as to why you need the Cricut machine? And you're like, but I just need this Cricut machine. And if that is what it is, you're not writing a grant. You're asking your organization for $300 or your friends group for $300. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a grant anymore. That's a specific product that your library needs, like a copier. Yeah, go ahead.
And that may be a way to start, if you can build that, as you said, the people who are interested in solving a need. If needs do come up once you've got that friends group established, you could then build on, build on, build on, and then get into writing more specific grants for your institution.
Yeah. And so what you're saying is like, it can't just be the Cricut, but you could build the Cricut into a larger grant. Like, let's say you're doing outreach services with homebound patrons or something like that. Like it can't just be the one single thing.
Yeah. We have a maker space that we wrote a grant to fund, and that's how we got our Cricut. So sometimes just we had no maker space for anyone who wasn't an engineer.
That's a great
But
point, though. If your community, if your statement is a certain need, then you can build that into a larger project, and it's just a point, a point within the project, and you have others that sort of support it on the way until you get to a project need that you need to write a grant on.
yeah. All right. Well, we are over time, and I want to respect y'all's day. I try to never go over with my students. So I won't go over with y'all. But thank you so much for coming. And as you are thinking about your day and about this meeting, I hope that you sit down and set a small goal for yourself for grants at your library. Challenge yourself to pick that goal and do something towards it, even if it's just a matter of figuring out what patrons need and decide whether that's your next grant. I'm so glad you came with me on this talk.